We saw some great victories this year in places like Maine, where they now have a state resilience office. We saw the rules around how funding can be used for beach restoration to go to support nature-based solutions in Hawaii. And we saw, some great advances in places like Washington, the state, to protect bull kelp, and in Oregon with their Oregon Beaches Forever campaign. So there's a lot of different amazing campaign work that's happening where, you can plug in where your passion and your place is. So it doesn't just have to be DC. I think oftentimes too, it can be not more impactful, but you can see the changes uh, and kind of fruits of your labor policy wise at the state and local level. Implementation is just a lot faster than what can happen at the federal level. So, lots of different ways to get involved. Local, state, federal, and to give folks a way to channel whatever they're feeling about the current administration and their policies within their communities.
Welcome back to the Surfrider podcast, brought to you by the Surfrider Foundation. My name is David Scales, and I'll be your host. Today, we're going to be looking back at the year in review. It's important when running a nonprofit or just any business to take an inventory at year end about how time and resources were utilized. This year presented very unique challenges for Surfrider that perhaps felt foreboding at this time last year with the impending change in federal administrations, both with very different understandings and ideologies around environmental science and management. But the year has proven to strengthen Surfrider's resolve and really highlight the necessity for community to collectively let their will be known. And despite the unique challenges of the year, CEO Dr. Chad Nelsen and his team at Surfrider secured 44 coastal victories in 2025.
Well, it's kind of, I would characterize it sort of in two ways. We've been sort of playing defense at the federal level and still trying to sort of advance our goals at the local and state level. And I would argue we've done a halfway decent job of that. No, in fact, I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish under pretty trying circumstances. So, at the federal level, we know that the Trump administration is no friend of our coasts and oceans. So we've seen massive cuts to important programs at NOAA and the EPA. We've been seeing weakening of regulations that are really important to protect our coasts and oceans, and the looming threat that became real last week for offshore drilling, which is something we've been worried about. So that's a campaign or a fight we've begun now, but we'll really see come together sort of in the next month and then next year to try to fend off drilling off the eastern Gulf of Mexico, California, and Alaska. So, trying to do what we can to stop bad things from happening at the federal level while making a ton of progress at the local and state level. We had some really significant state legislation passed in Oregon, Washington, and Virginia to reduce plastic pollution, fended off some bad bills at the state level in Texas that were going to weaken something called the Texas Open Beaches Act, which protects Texas beaches. A lot of success trying to, at the end of the day, we're really trying to, clean up our waterways. So fighting for clean water, trying to eliminate plastic pollution in the ocean and frankly everywhere. Trying to ensure that our coasts and our coastal communities are prepared for sea level rise and coastal erosion issues. We're trying to protect our oceans and ensure beach access, right? Those are our five big areas of work. So we're trying to measure ourselves against are we advancing that, day in and day out? And we do that in two ways. We roll up our sleeves and steward our coast through our programmatic work. So this is beach cleanups and water testing and ocean-friendly restaurants and the new climate action program. And then we try to advance good policy at the local, state, and federal level. So that's really how we measure ourselves. And so when we look back right now at the end of the year, we say, hey, are we making progress? And so one of our biggest impact metrics is coastal victories.
Okay.
And What we mean by a coastal victory is an official decision made that's going to benefit our coasts or access or both. So that could be we won a lawsuit in Hawaii Supreme Court that says environmental conditions need to be considered for permits. It could be that we pass a law in Washington State to make the producers of plastic pay for the downstream waste. It could be a local ordinance to um, manage a emerging problem, which is plastic sawdust from plastic lumber in New Jersey. So these are and we've had 44 of those this year,
Wow.
which is a pretty good number.
Chad mentioned playing defense at the federal level, and what he's referring to actually began on day one of the Trump administration. On January 20th, when Trump signed an executive order reinstating the expansion of coal, oil, and fossil fuel energy production, that day he also signed another executive order directing the U.S. to immediately withdraw from the Paris Agreement and related international climate commitments. And then in March, the administration enacted deregulation for some of the US's largest polluters. The Environmental Protection Agency announced what it described as, quote, the single greatest and most consequential day of deregulation in US history, end quote, with 31 major actions weakening regulations on power plants and loosening restrictions on the oil and gas industry's pollution. These actions ultimately served to highlight the importance of ground level work being done at the local level. Emma Haydocy is Surfrider's senior manager for the Coast and Climate Initiative and was amongst the busiest on the front lines.
Yeah, so the Coast and Climate Initiative stayed busy in 2025. I would say that, metric wise for projects, our climate action program stayed busy. As a reminder, that program has been around for decades informally, right? So we
Right.
have chapters and staff who have been leading on projects and working to restore our coastlines and better prepare them for the impacts of climate change. And they've been doing that for decades, but the program was formally codified in 2024, and since then has really hit the ground running. And so this past year, that was very, very true. 74 events with 19 chapters planted, over 35,000 native plants in our coastlines, 25 pounds of seeds that were spread, totaling 20 plus acres that were restored. So really incredible impact when you think about coastlines that need to be better prepared for the impacts of climate change, that need to be restored. So I would say, volume wise, they're crushing it. 83,000 pounds of invasive species removed. That number is incredible. And as a reminder, we talk about putting seeds and plants in the ground to help build resilience, to help with flood mitigation, and so that our dunes can better withstand and coastal habitats can better withstand the impacts of climate change, whether that be flooding, storms, erosion. But dunes are also incredibly threatened when we have invasive species that compromise their health. So when we have a dune that looks healthy on the outside, but is populated with a ton of invasive species, it can mean that those habitats and ecosystems are not as well suited and prepared and adapted to be able to handle what climate change is throwing at them. So 83,000 pounds of invasives gone. And all the while building incredible community along the way. Over 2,000 volunteers went out and got their hands dirty this year. So incredible impact on the climate action program front. We also launched a reimagined State of the Beach report. This is a report that Surfriders released for many years that has historically looked at how states are planning for the impacts of climate change, how they are protecting coastlines or not, frankly, at the state level through legislation and implementation of that legislation. So historically, we've had the report in this one format, and we reimagined it this year to instead tell stories of where Surfrider volunteers and regions are really getting work on climate right, whether that be through policy, whether that be through the climate action program, or whether that be through long-term community-led coastal adaptation projects, such as those going on at San Onofre State Beach right now. So a new report that sheds some climate optimism in a time when there may not be as much climate optimism out in the universe. And then our chapters and staff have really been leading the way on some incredible campaigns, whether that be at the state or local level. We have seen work from coast to coast going on that has been really proactive and reacting to bad projects where they're happening. So a lot of good stuff going on all over the place.
Surfrider's work this year wasn't just limited to the local, state, and federal levels. Miho Ligare is someone who started her work as a volunteer at Surfrider, got a master's in environmental science and management, and is now senior manager for Surfrider's plastic pollution initiative.
I have my master's in environmental science and management from UC Santa Barbara at the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management. And then my undergrad was at UC San Diego, and I have an anthropology background.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
random, I know, but I feel like it trained me to read a lot when with my anthro degree, and then it also like ties in with policy because what was really interesting for me is like you can make the best laws or the strongest laws, but if they're not being implemented or enforced properly, then it's not really working. And so it's like, how do you go about working with people, communities to
Yeah.
find solutions that make sense for that community and yeah, implement in a way that is the most effective and it doesn't look like the same for every area. And so like figuring out that has been really fascinating to me.
Miho's been with Surfrider for 5 years, but her new role has allowed her to move from local, beyond federal, and to an international conversation about how to eliminate not only plastic pollution, but our dependence on plastics.
Yeah, so I actually stepped into this role last November. So for me, it was kind of a new transition and a professional growth opportunity. And so overall, being able to support our whole network, our grassroots activists. My background is in plastic pollution policy, and so that's something that I continue to be able to support, which was fantastic at the local, state, federal. And then something for me that was new and exciting was being involved with the Global Plastics Treaty. And so I was able to work with Surfrider's global affiliates and bring this issue to like an international scale. I got to go to Geneva, Switzerland this summer and be part of the negotiation process and see what was going on and meet with Surfrider Europe staff and other partner organizations, as well as other delegates and leaders from all over the world talking about plastics was really eye-opening and exciting to see, although there were some disappointing aspects to it. But overall, just such a wonderful experience to be there.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they're even having those conversations, I think, is a sign of progress.
Right, for sure. And I think another piece of it is, we used to talk about plastic pollution as like a waste management issue. And so, cleaning up our oceans, but now we're having these conversations about the real issue is we're producing too much plastic. And so how can we reduce plastic production and plastic pollution at the source? And so those are conversations that have transpired over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think we used to talk a lot more about marine debris and just changing the name to plastic pollution. I think like what you said speaks kind of volumes as to how we're evolving our thinking about this issue.
Fantastic. Um, so the Geneva trip was one of the big projects that you worked on this year. Was there any additional?
Yeah, so a few other ones that I worked on just overall in my role, I'm supporting, again, our whole network. And so few that I didn't specifically work on, but some of the really big victories we saw this year coming out of our network. Washington passed an extended producer responsibility law. So this is a really comprehensive plastic prevention law. It focuses on plastic packaging. The Washington chapters and staff worked on this piece of legislation. It's statewide law for over 6 years. And so it just speaks to how much time and effort it takes to pass a law. And what's really unique about these extended producer responsibility or EPR laws is that it puts the onus back on the producers to think about and take responsibility for all the plastic packaging that they've created. And so that's really exciting to see the producers take ownership and like make investments to increase our recycling structure or put investments towards refill and reuse systems. And so it kind of is switching the model a little bit and, really looking to the producers to address the issue. And so that was really exciting to see. I think another one is in Oregon, another statewide law that was passed is we coined it the Beyond the Bag campaign. And so this one statewide, they got rid of the thicker plastic bags. And so recognizing that, Surfrider collectively has done a lot of work at the local and statewide level, passing single-use plastic bag bans. And we're seeing that those thicker reusable bags are still causing issues. And so California also recently passed a statewide bag ban addressing those thicker bags. And so Oregon followed suit. So they're the second state in the country to pass this type of law. And so it's really great to see more of the momentum. And I think we'll see more states pass these similar laws. So those are
Amazing.
the main ones. Yeah, that come to my mind that are a little bit different. They take years to pass
Yeah.
and just really exciting victories.
Another major win that actually took longer than years, it took 3 decades, in fact, was a coastal restoration project at Surfers Point in Ventura.
A project coming to completion that's been 30 years in the making there. Our campaign at Surfers Point is finally coming to a close after a poorly sited project was built there decades ago, and our chapter fought tirelessly to fix a poorly sited project. We now have a relocated parking lot and bike path and a beautifully restored beach where stewardship activities and restoration events continue to ensure that that Surfers Point and that surf break and treasured coastal area continues to be healthy now that that project has come to completion. It's the leading global example for how to do managed retreat and how to do it well and how to do it with community buy-in and with a diverse group of stakeholders. What we've really done there is taken lesson learned over the past 30 some odd years and are applying that to our work at Sano and San Onofre State Beach. Obviously, with how quickly we're seeing the impacts of climate change in different coastal areas, we want to be able to deploy that process a lot more rapidly, understanding that we may not have 30 years in some places to be able to move out of harm's way, but that we have the framework to be able to do that. And not only just to be able to move the infrastructure out of harm's way and restore the beach, that's incredible, but being able to do it with such a diverse group of stakeholders and with their buy-in. Coastal management decisions often happen behind closed doors without feedback or input or direction from the folks who are most impacted. Surfers Point is really the first example of doing that. And we are keeping the legacy of that work going at places like Sano, where we've been working now for several years to connect with the community, to talk about what that beach looks like now and what that beach is going to look like in the future, and then work with community stakeholders to envision what we want that beach to look like, knowing what we know about what climate change is going to potentially do to that beach.
In regard to the year of work in 2025, what were some of the major roadblocks that you encountered?
Yeah, roadblocks. I would say the biggest elephant in the room is the federal government right now. And what I would say on that is, we spent the large part of the previous administration celebrating some of the largest ever investments in climate resilience, hand over fist dollars being allocated and dispersed to communities to be able to implement projects and to organizations like Surfrider. And a lot of that funding was rescinded or was held back, which has certainly been a challenge. I would also say that where we have had previous success in the federal landscape passing proactive coastal or climate resilience policy. For example, at the end of 2024, we saw the passage of an improved Coastal Barrier Resources Act, which helps to protect undeveloped swaths of coastal land from development via federal protection. And that happened, and we haven't been as successful this year in that space. What I'll say about that is that although we have not seen as many proactive victories, I would not say there's been no progress on that front. Like there still is some reason for optimism. I think a strong example of that would be the federal budget process. Um, Primarily that we saw a president's budget request that looked to cut, if not significantly diminish, funding in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, so NOAA, which is really one of like the strongest areas for funding for our coasts, whether that be through funding for marine sanctuaries or for coastal zone management grants, which states use to be able to do resilience and climate related projects within their states, to sea grant programs. So the president's budget call to cut a lot of that, zero it out in some places, and Congress by and large has rejected that request. Like funding is not the best it's ever been. The Senate's a little bit better than the House at this point in time, but uh, there's a lot of reason I think, to celebrate or at least have some optimism about how Congress feels about the importance of these programs. I think regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, if you live in a coastal state, you can recognize that this funding does a lot of good for coastal communities and for folks who rely on our coastlines for their livelihoods and lifeways. So uh, roadblock in a lot of ways, but I would say there's some room for optimism, and we still are seeing some positive policy advancements. One of our campaigns is to see the passage of the Digital Coast Act, which is a giant repository for digital resources around coastal management and coastal resilience. And that is moving. So we have some good stuff happening despite some challenges. I would also say that there have been some challenges trickling down into some of the states that we operate in at the federal down to state level. We had a lot of success on our state and local level campaigns related to the Coast and Climate Initiative this year. One of them is in Oregon, and it is a bill that would help to create better rules around how we work with nature-based solutions, especially as they pertain to erosion. There are some budget shortfalls because of funds not trickling down from the federal level that may uh, slow that process. There are budget shortfalls that need to go to SNAP and Medicaid and Healthy Start, and really vital programs that help keep people and communities going, that are taking away from potential policy advancements and funding to go to support that. So certainly some challenges, but I would say by and large, we've been able to overcome them, or at least where we're not making progress on the federal level, we're certainly making progress on the state and local level within our network.
Considering the environmental policy changes enacted by the Trump administration, I wanted to know how this has altered Surfrider's way of operation.
Well, that's a good question. It turns out Project 2025 was a to-do list, a blueprint. And so pretty much everything that's listed in Project 2025 about our coasts and oceans, eviscerate NOAA, open our coast to drilling, et cetera, we're in there. So it is, now we know. And so I think, you know, in some of these things, there was Doge that was arguably illegal. Side note, will end up costing us more money than it saved, undoubtedly. Um, so there were things we didn't anticipate because usually the federal government operates in a fairly predictable system, and that system has been broken and altered and disrupted. And so I think that caught a lot of people off balance. Frankly, I think a lot of what happened was probably illegal, and we'll see how that ultimately gets sorted out. So that had, I think, people scrambling a little bit. And elections have consequences. So there's only some things that are happening. The Congress and the president have the right to do. And so it's our job to say, hey, if you're going to make these massive cuts to NOAA, National Ocean Atmosphere Administration, that we think are going to impact our ability to effectively protect our coasts, or by the way, predict our surf or our weather, um, we want to, they have the right to do that, to cut the budget. And it's our job then to advocate for those things, hopefully to be built back in the future. So some of it is just doing sort of trying to educate people on the consequences of the decisions that are being made with the hopes that enough people say, hey, maybe having a high functioning NOAA so we can predict hurricanes and have surf forecasts and manage our coast is a good idea. So that may be end up being ultimately a battle for the future or in the future.
2025 has proven that federal or large scale threats can really highlight the importance of local grassroots work.
Every administration comes to an end. We see changes in leadership, and I think that while it can be frustrating to have to, it feels like Groundhog Day. Like I can't believe we're talking about offshore drilling again, but that's what happens, right? Like we had, last presidential administration, it felt like we were smooth sailing, we were getting funding hand over fist. There was still a 5-year plan that included new leases and new lease sales during that administration. That was part of how the sausage was made with the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law. Like it's part of the process. There are concessions that are made, but everything changes. So it can be frustrating, but it's also just how the process works. And then on the other hand, I'll say, I think it underscores the urgency of all of the other work that we're doing. So it's like, okay, we've got all this bad stuff happening. We need to keep doing, we need to keep putting, planting more plants. We need to continue to pass laws at the state and local level that are proactive. We also need to stop bad projects where we can, to be able to move the needle, notwithstanding whatever's going on with the feds. So I think that's one of the things that makes Surfrider such an incredible organization is like we have an incredible group of folks who are working on federal policy and doing everything that we can to try to, protect the programs and funding that are most important to us and advance good policy. And also we have this, hundreds of clubs and chapters across the country who are, doing the work on the ground via our programs like the Climate Action Program and working to pass laws and stop bad projects. So there's, I think, a lot of room to continue to do good work, even when it seems like everything you're scrolling on social media is like doom scrolling.
Something that I love about our plastic pollution initiative and our organization as a whole is like when there's opportunities where policy isn't necessarily working or we don't have as much opportunities to push that, like we can turn to our program work. And so our beach cleanups had a really great year. Our ocean friendly businesses, our ocean friendly restaurant and hotels program, like we're enrolling more ocean friendly businesses that are, sold on this idea of transitioning away from disposable plastics. And so even if the policy work might be slow, like chapters and student clubs are still able to make a difference and get rid of plastic. And so that's been really great to see too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can you tell me what are the ocean friendly restaurants and hotels programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, our Ocean Friendly Restaurants is a network of restaurants that have like bought into this idea of getting away from single-use plastics. And so there's certain criteria that our ocean-friendly restaurants have to meet in order to become an ocean-friendly restaurant or an OFR. And so the whole idea about the program is just celebrating businesses and showcasing them and highlighting, everything that OFRs and OFHs are doing to make refill and reuse mainstream. And so what's also really unique is that they have a network and we provide resources for them if a restaurant is interested in participating and joining, but they haven't fully met the criteria. We're able to provide resources, where volunteers can go to the restaurant, speak to the managers, and talk about how they can go about transitioning away from single-use plastics. And then also within the network, the restaurant managers are able to connect with each other. There's also vendor discounts. And so there's opportunities to save money, also transitioning away from single-use plastic. And so with that, we have we beat our 600 mark, which is great because that was like pre-pandemic. We were up there, and then during the pandemic, we lost some ocean-friendly restaurants, but we're actually closer to 650 ocean-friendly restaurants now across this country, which is super exciting. There's 30 different states that are participating in our OFRs, and that equates to 42 million single-use plastic-free meals every year. So like every single meal, every single restaurant we're able to sign up, we're like making that much of a difference and creating this like cultural shift away from plastic which is super exciting to see. And so the ocean-friendly hotels, we actually hit our 1-year anniversary, and it's a similar model as our ocean-friendly restaurant programs. And so again, hotels trying to do the right thing, moving towards more sustainable practices. And so in addition to getting away from single-use plastic foodware, if they have a restaurant on site, it has to be an ocean-friendly restaurant. But we're really targeting like the plastic water bottles and then also the mini plastic toiletry bottles. And so in total, we have 38 ocean-friendly hotels, and it's only been a year, which is fantastic. We can see like that momentum and the interest in growing this program from hotels. And so that equates to 1.6 million plastic bottles out of circulation from hotels, and then 2.5 million plastic toiletry bottles. Just never reaching the ocean or even being produced or used. So that's super exciting to see.
Each year, Surfrider provides a beach cleanup report that details the total data from their regular beach cleanups. The report includes the weight of trash collected, and it breaks it down by item: cigarette butts, food wrappers, plastic straws. Not only are these numbers shocking, but it also allows Surfrider to share the urgency for action with lawmakers and volunteers alike.
I think record-breaking numbers, again, like more people showing up, our chapters doing a phenomenal job organizing cleanups. So overall, we collected close to 115,000 pounds of trash and over 800 cleanups in 2024. And about 23,000 volunteers, or like 22-ish thousand volunteers. And so that's a lot of people dedicated to protecting our coasts and oceans. So it's fantastic to see. And then kind of reiterating the point where 83% of the trash that was collected was plastic. And so again, just like that importance of reducing plastic at the source so it never enters the environment in our communities is something that, year after year, that is something the data shows that plastic is the most, predominantly found item. And so having to address that through policy and our program work is a priority for our program.
As we look towards 2026, one of the most pressing issues is the Trump administration's new lease plan to open new oil drilling sites off California, the Gulf of Mexico, and previously protected waters off of Florida, Alaska, and the high Arctic, where drilling has actually never been attempted because of the hazards that it presents. This is a 5-year plan, and the Department of Interior has actually requested public feedback for a 90-day window, which ends on January 23rd, 2026. So I wanted to get Chad's perspective on what this all means.
federal waters, which is the waters from state waters, that's usually 3 miles out to 200 miles. That water is managed by the federal government, Department of Interior, and they put out these leasing plans for offshore drilling. And that's where those leasing plans is kind of like a mining claim. Then an oil company can try to secure a lease and give them future rights, like a mining rights to drill for oil in that place. And so those leases are the precursor to drilling. And an agency called the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is responsible for sort of those lease plans. Every president puts out a 5-year lease plan. They get recycled pretty much every administration. And in Trump's first term, the lease plan tried to open up all coasts of the United States to drilling everywhere. That proved to be very unpopular. It had bipartisan opposition, which, by the way, the new plan does too. And so just last week, the Department of Interior issued their new lease plan, and it proposes opening a portion of the Gulf closer to Florida, the California coast, 2/3 of it, and a big chunk of the waters off Alaska. And so that initiates now a process. There's a 60-day comment period and a process before that plan is finalized. Whatever gets finalized, presumably would then allow oil companies to try to get those leases to try to drill. So we see it as the big threat. We don't want to see any new areas open for drilling. And it's interesting because we anticipated this plan could be a lot worse. The entire Atlantic's off the plan, and that's because it's unpopular with both Democrats and Republicans on the coast, on the Atlantic coast. Um, Florida, Governor DeSantis has come out opposed to the plan to open the Gulf that's closer to Florida. And I just read yesterday that a number of Republicans in California are opposed to the plan off California coast. So in a time when these things are typically super partisan and the Republicans want the one things and the Democrats want others, this is a plan that seems to be unpopular on both sides of the aisle, which is somewhat unusual for this president. So, and that's not surprising because offshore drilling's a mess. We learned this like 2 or 3 years ago when the Huntington pipeline was like broken by that boat or whatever it was, and we had a relatively small oil spill off Huntington in Southern California. And there was one in 2015 in Santa Barbara. There was the Gulf spill, on and on and on. It seems like every 3 to 5 years we have a major oil spill on the coast, and it reminds us what a mess it is.
So, what are potential action steps to fight against it?
Yeah, I mean, so we have at Surfrider this comment 60-day comment period's open right now. We have an action alert on our website. I think it pops up right when you log into our webpage. So if you go to surfrider.org, you can sign that and register your opposition. We are working with state and local government all across the country to governors of states, city councils to pass resolutions or declare their opposition. So we're building political opposition. Um, and there's a lot of business opposition too, because if you think about it, if you're a business that relies on coastal and ocean tourism, surf shops, restaurants, hotels, pretty much every business in every coastal community, you have a lot to lose. Uh, and very little to gain if there's drilling and the eventual spilling of oil off your coast. So there's a business alliance that's in opposition. So it's a wildly unpopular plan. But we'll
When
be mobilizing to try to ensure that there's enough sort of local business and political opposition that they retract the plan or they choose something different.
when somebody goes through the website and signs the petition, what does that do exactly?
So what they're doing is they're sending a note to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management saying, "Hey, as an American citizen, or I oppose this plan." So it's in some ways just registering public opposition. And we're also sending a note to their federal representatives saying, "Hey, this is a plan that we oppose." we know the reason the Atlantic wasn't on the plan is because enough elected officials on the East Coast, governors, representatives, and senators said, this is bad, don't do it. And they pulled it from the plan. So we want to repeat that in the Gulf and in Alaska and in California.
But the outlook on 2026 isn't all doom and gloom. There's also great progress to be made and proactive, hands-on projects and civic engagement on the docket.
Yeah, so I'm excited about a lot for this next year. I think December is really the kickoff to our work at Sano, where we are welcoming in the community and really launching that project and getting started, again, working with engineers and that whole process to look at what this beach might look like. So much excitement and energy around what's happening at Sano over the next year. And so folks can follow Surfrider. Both our South OC and San Diego chapters are going to be heavily involved in that. So join your local chapter if you're in that area, or just join your local chapter anywhere to get involved. But I would say that if you live in Southern California or have enjoyed that treasured surf break, lots of exciting stuff happening. And we'd love to have folks come out to a meeting, fill out a survey, tell us what's important about that location, or show up to another restoration event at Trestles. We are also very excited because Trestles is going to be the surfing venue for the upcoming Olympics. And so we just want to keep all eyes on the Sano as we gear up for that and for this exciting chapter in Surfrider's history at this location. The CAP program's got more ambitious goals coming. We every year set goals to exceed what we've done the previous year. So we are looking to increase acreage, increase the tens of thousands of plants that are going to be installed, and continue to grow our community impact and getting more folks out for these events. We have got some exciting projects that are going to be in the works all over our network. So again, when it comes to the climate action program, joining your local chapter and just keeping your fingers on the pulse of what's upcoming in that area is the best thing we can do there. And we are going to continue to work to advocate for policies everywhere that are good for our coastlines. Whether you're in Oregon and you want to protect Oregon's beaches forever, whether you want to support nature-based solutions in Florida, whether you want to see a healthier, more well-adapted North Shore of Hawaii, we've got a lot of great work going on. So, I think the bottom line is we want folks to get involved with their local chapter, but also to keep your eyes on what's going on in DC with this new offshore drilling plan. That is going to be a huge focus for Surfrider over this next year. Organizationally for us, we're all hands on deck to stop any new oil and gas leases in the ocean. And we're also going to continue to advocate for key funding for our coasts. And we're hopeful that we can continue to, elevate the loud, passionate voices of folks who care about our coastlines and who rely on them in Congress so that we see those policy goals achieved.
One of my philosophies is the smaller the scale of government, the more practical they become. And what I mean by that is, your city council's hearing about potholes. And so they need to fix problems that people can see, hear, and feel at the local level. And so they tend to be really practical. Up at the federal level, these things are pretty distant, right? By the time they filter all the way down to what happens in your neighborhood or your beach. And so it is important to be active at that local level, and you can get a lot done. And the same is true at the state level. And a lot of people are like, hey, I don't like what's happening, but I don't know what to do. And that's where we come in. And it can start as simple as like spending the morning cleaning up a beach, which feels good. I've done hundreds, if not thousands of beach cleanups. I still learn something new every time I go down there because of what I see washing up on the shore. Or you can get involved in local advocacy or state advocacy. So we're just an avenue for folks who want to make a difference. And there has been an uptick, and that's positive.
There are 3 basic ways that you can get involved in 2026 at Surfrider. Number 1, you can become a member. You can do it for as little as $5 a month, and that provides not only financial resources, but it also gives political power, because presenting a network of 50,000 voices is certainly impactful, but the impact of 500,000 voices could be world-changing. Gift memberships are also available for this. A second way is you can make a charitable donation. Surfrider has a team of lawyers, scientists, and policy experts to ensure that the volunteers' work is making the maximum impact on all levels. And then lastly, the third way is to become a volunteer.
We are a volunteer, grassroots, volunteer-based organization. We have tens of thousands of volunteers all across the country, but there's always more work to be done than we can do. So show up for the impact and stick around for the community. It is a great community of people. These are people who love the coasts. They're active in their coastal communities, so they're actually people who want to make things better. You don't usually find a lot of unpleasant people who are willing to get up at 8 a.m. to do a beach cleanup on a Saturday morning. Usually they're a pretty good bunch of folks. And so I encourage people to find a way, if you love our coasts and oceans as much as you do, as much as I do, giving back to them, I think, makes a lot of sense.
If you're inspired to get involved and to strengthen the community of like-minded people making an outsized impact, you could do it at surfrider.org. The ocean needs more friends in 2026 and beyond, and the scope of work is only limited by people and resources. My name is David Scales for the Surfrider Podcast, brought to you by the Surfrider Foundation. Until next time, learn more at surfrider.org.